I'm glad that you're here. This is the 10th annual European Union Strategy Forum for the Baltic Sea area, and that hasn't changed from yesterday. So this is actually day 2, and I'm excited to be here, and I hope you're excited too. Right now, we would like to talk about the hashtags that you can use, but also if you want to use the Wi-Fi, then the password for Wi-Fi will have to do with annual forum _2019. There will be more information about the lunch as well, and the information will just come a little bit later. But now we're in the process of kicking it off, and I'm glad to tell you that we will now take a look from the socio-economic point of view. And this will be with the director of Nordregio, Mr. Kiel Nielsen. So please welcome him. Thank you very much. So this is the pointer. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to the hosts for a lovely party yesterday. I will give you an overview of the socioeconomic situation in the Baltic Sea region. Then I will focus a little upon the challenges, the demographic challenges that our countries are facing at the moment. And then I will finalize with trying to make a connection to the circular economy. The background for the socioeconomic overview is actually a project that went on for quite a long time ago. It was a project on territorial monitoring. It was an initiative from VASAB, and it was financed by the ESPON program. And then when the EU-SBSR forum met in Stockholm in 2016, Nordregio made an update of this mapping, and actually also introduced in that report a so-called regional potential index. And that's a way, it's a very traditional way that we are trying to, so to say, take the temperature or measure the performance and compare the regions. And it consists actually of 3 areas. It's demographic potential, it's labor market potential, and economic potential. And there are some indicators behind this. When it comes to demography, we are looking at population density, net migration rate, demographic dependency rate, I come back to that later on more, and gender balance. Then there are 3 indicators when it comes to the labor market situation. It's the employment rate, it's the share of the age group 25 to 64 with tertiary level education, and it's about youth unemployment. And then there is the economic potential, which is about GDP per capita and investments in research, development, and innovation. And that was the picture that we got in 2015. And we can say that if we start with demographic potential, then there is a clear north-south divide, that the demographic potential is much larger in the southern parts. If we take a line from actually St. Petersburg, Stockholm, and Oslo, and then southwards, then the more sparsely populated areas and the shrinking regions we find primarily in the north and to the east. We have a situation where actually in the Baltic states the demographic situation is positive in the capital areas and actually more or less shrinking in a lot of the other parts. Then if we go and have a look at the labor force and economic potential, then there is primarily a west-east divide. That means that the western part, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany has a clearly higher potential than the eastern part. There is a clear divide in that. And then if we look at taking this all together, a ranking, it surprised us, I must say, somewhat, that the Nordic capital areas were clearly ahead of metropolitan regions like Hamburg and Berlin. So you find that it's Oslo, Stockholm, it's Copenhagen, also Helsinki among the highest ranking in this. Unfortunately, I don't have later figures on this. It's a little outdated now. It's based on 2015 figures, actually, or data. And we would be happy to renew it at an occasion later on, I think. But for the rest of the... Now I will turn over to and look more specifically into the demographic challenges. And then I will rely on purely Nordic data. So I apologize that I can't cover the whole Baltic Sea region when it comes to, but I think that the challenges are probably quite similar, or I know that they are quite similar, although there are, of course, differences between the countries as well. And it's based on a biannual mapping that Nordregio is carrying out for the Nordic Council of Ministers, called State of the Nordic Region. There are 3 trends or challenges when it comes to demographic development. And these 3 are urbanization, aging population, and immigration. If we start with urbanization, then you can say that the Nordic countries are actually doing quite well when it comes to demographic development. We have about 3 times as high increase during the last 10 years than the EU average. It's up to about 8% in the Nordic countries. What we see here is actually the concentration of the expected population increase until 2030 and how it is distributed geographically, which is quite interesting to see and compare between the regional policies in the Nordic countries. There are clear differences. Norway has a tradition of having a very strong regional policy and supporting the more remote districts. And we can also see on the map that the population will become more well distributed. While, for example, Sweden, which up until a few years ago have had a quite laissez-faire policy when it comes to regional development. There you have the most concentrated, actually, population increase. This is on a more overall level, but also if we go down and look at a more detailed level, you can see urbanization. And with the example here, you have the Finnish town or city Joensuu, which is pretty well growing, with a population increase about 5% during a 10-year period here. But if you look in the details and compare the red and the blue squares here, you can see that actually the number of shrinking grids are much are much more than the number of growing grids. It's almost the double of the part of the municipality where population is shrinking. Over to the next challenge, and that is about the aging population. We know that we are, in that case, working with an index called Old Age Dependency Ratio. And that index is actually, it's a little outdated, that as well, because people work longer and they start working later on. They take their education, but it's still, we are using the same indicator that has been used for a very long time. And that is the number of people over 65 compared to the population 14 to 64, or 15 to 64. That is the so-called old age dependency ratio. And you can see here where the situation is serious. And actually, if you look at, there are some black areas in Finland representing municipalities where actually you have the number of people over 65 is higher than the number of people between 15 and 64. So that is actually a very important challenge, especially when we are talking about the so-called Nordic welfare state, where it depends on the working age population and their taxes that are paying for the care of the elderly. Then the third challenge and the third trend is that if you look at the population increase in the Nordic countries, and especially in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, 2/3 of the increase is depending on immigration. And if you look at this map, there you can see the red areas are municipalities where population is shrinking overall. And the green are municipalities where population is growing, regardless of migration. But the yellow ones, and especially if you look at the small map with where the regions are, you can see that the yellow areas actually are quite huge. And in these areas, it's thanks to migration, international immigration, that the population is growing and not shrinking. So therefore, I mean, the migration has an enormous influence, actually, on the demographic development. Then, of course, you can combine these two things, the aging population and the migration, because the migrants are normally in working ages. And having said that, I must underline that migration cannot solve the aging population problem. We have calculated that. And if we look at the development until 2050 that we are looking at here, then Norway, for example, should have 10 times more population. They should have 50 million inhabitants if they should have a constant old age dependency ratio. So it's not realistic, but it's important. It's the migration increases the working age population. And what you see here is in the outer figure, the black line, that is a scenario that Eurostat made in 2015 for population in 2050, while the brown figure represents what would have been the same age structure if you wouldn't have had any migration at all. And you can see that it's a rather important share, especially in Norway and Sweden, of the population in working ages that comes from migration. Okay, But that is under the prerequisite that people get to job. And that is also part of the welfare state, that the aging population, they should work. But there the Nordic countries has a big problem, actually, because if you see here the employment rates, where you compare natives with foreign-born people and especially with people born outside the EU, you have a large difference. There is, in Sweden, the difference is almost 20% between natives and people born outside the EU. So we have a big discrepancy in this case. And that is also, of course, a threat, you can say, to the welfare state. If people in the working ages are not actually paying taxes and contributing then to covering the costs for elderly care and these things. And this is an OECD comparison, quite old as well, but there you can see that the Nordic countries are among those where the differences are the highest between the natives and immigrants. While regarding other countries within the Baltic Sea region, Germany is in the middle, and then we find Lithuania and Poland, where there are almost none differences between the natives and the immigrants when it comes to employment. And that is worth thinking about, actually. And then we have had carried out a study where different measures, that is of course a political problem that is dealt with. And in one of the reports, one report called Integrating Immigrants into the Nordic Labor Markets, economic researchers has looked at different measures actually. What counts, what can help, and what is the evidence behind the effects of different measures. And I only will refer to one of them, and that is about education efforts, where the first statement here is quite interesting. It says, when comparing natives and immigrants with similar skills, the employment gaps decrease and are even reversed in some cases. So the reason, as I see it then, when we compare, for example, Poland and Lithuania with Sweden, Norway, and so on, is that we have a situation where we have a misfit between the skills of the immigrants and the labor market needs. That means that manual works and so on are very scarce in the Nordic countries, while they are more common. And also that the costs for labor are much higher in the Nordic countries, which means that it's tougher to get into the labor market. So, and there are, of course, different efforts that can help on that. And one is different kinds of subsidized jobs combined with education and so on. And then I was thinking about this with the circular economy. And this is my last slide. The relation between this. This is a picture in the early 20th century from Tampere in Finland. It shows a farmer. He has collected the content of the latrines in the city, and he brings this out on his fields and spread it out on the fields to nutrify the soils. And that is an example of a circular economy, and it's in the basic, the primary sector jobs. That's food production, and things like that. And that is kind of jobs that don't normally you have some excellent examples where immigrants have been integrated. Närpes in Finland is a well-known municipality where immigrants work in the horticultural production of tomatoes and things like that. So there you have a lot of manual jobs, actually, that you can employ a lot of people without high theoretical skills. The other part of the circular economy, or in this case, circular economy means that you take care of things, you mend your bicycle instead of buying new ones and so on. And there you have, there I can see as well that there is a market if we increase the circular economy in the society, then we need some manual work actually to mend our things, to make furniture good, refurbished and things like that. So that was actually the part that I could see that the circular economy could increase the demand for manual skills, actually, that could be combined with education and so on, and be a part of a solution to the integration problems when it comes to immigrants. So that was my contribution today. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Is this the team of Nordregio, the picture that you have taken? Wow, that's a really nice team. We will hear a little bit more about the misfit of the skills that are needed in the labor market and the ones that are actually provided by the immigrants when they come to the new country during the panel debate. So I kindly encourage you to stay for the whole session. And now I'd like to let you know about a wonderful project that has just started this June from the 8th to the 11th. There was a gathering of young people aged between 18 and 25. They actually met here in Gdańsk to talk about the pressing issues of the circular economy, not just that, but also politics and what to do so that the young people, the youth, participate in the society so that they maybe are more engaged politically, that they actually vote. And some topics have been really successful. The meeting was a success as well. There were more than 100 participants, so that's quite a number. 11 countries, 11 states of the Baltic Sea region plus Iceland were welcome at the event. And to really tell you how much it means and also how the youth can engage and to really spread this good word and this good news, we've invited the BSSSC Youth Board member, Mr. Martin Rümelein. So this is a warm applause for the guy.
Good morning. Yeah, it's not that many people here, but since you asked the travel questions, I just gonna start with another travel question, very quick as well. Who of you is not from Poland, but did not arrive by airplane here? Please show up. If there would be only you sitting here, then 2/3 would show up with their hands, because 2/3 about traveled here without using airplanes. From all around the Baltic Sea region, using ferry, using bus, using trains. But that is only something that I wanted to mention, very brief. So sustainable EET was an aspect we really put front and center throughout the youth camp, and we have also room for improvement, but we started there. So let's just get very quickly started. A youth camp. We just wanted to organize this youth camp. We started about a year ago. Here you see a little picture from the youth camp. But the big question is, what is a youth camp, really? And no, yeah. What is a youth camp? And well, the youth camp basically can be broken down into 3 figures. 100 people, about 100 people, 100 youth, plus we had another 10 from a partner. Then we had 4 days in this wonderful island of outside of Gdansk, in the Hotel Orle, right next to the beach, in a perfect environment where we could really be creative, make a lot of progress, I think, on a lot of ideas for the EU SPSR, for the EU policy in the future. And then there is one last figure, and that is basically that we created a movement. It is not just that we were a group, one group. It was not like 10 separate groups. We had working groups, of course, but they reunited afterwards, and it was really one big movement, one group, this perfect environment. You can just imagine it, how it must have been. I can only encourage you next time, if there is something like that, I'm going to talk about that later, then you should maybe come on the last day and listen what the youth has to say, then you will really get the spirit that I cannot sadly bring over now that good. Yes. So let me start with some outcomes of the youth camp that will be also found in a youth declaration. Well, and first it really was a basic thing that we really tried to already start kind of at the youth camp this time, and that is really making a Baltic Sea culture festival, and which includes, of course, music and all the other different kinds of culture aspects and culture horizons. But we already tried to start with that, but in the future, we really would like if we have this Baltic Sea culture music festival where everybody can go, everybody can join, which spreads a lot of cultural awareness, which really is a festival for everybody, and which is organized by the youth, but organized for everybody, just to give also the perspective of the youth to everybody. Then there was another outcome, and that is really that we saw education is really a main facilitator nowadays. So we thought, how should we bring education about what we talk about daily here? It is mostly the SDGs. How should we bring that to small kids? So, we thought there should be a small book which really is really written locally, maybe also shows more connections to the daily life, and which is designed by local artists and really shows the youth and the children that the Baltic Sea belongs to them, to their parents and their whole family, and there is already something in the works. Some participants were so eager on that idea that they already started a brief concept, and they made a Facebook page which is called Baltic Sea Belongs to Kids. You can just try to look that up, follow it. I think they might post some more stuff on there. We will also try to, later when we have the youth declaration from the camp ready, try to get it through that channel. But that is definitely a thing you should look into. Then we also have like a university on a ship crossing the Baltic Sea region. Well, we thought we have lots of room for improvement, and we really should take some of the points that we talk about daily into society. Out of the EU SPSR, we need that for being successful on that. So we really thought that we really should encouraged to have a university ship, just because it is very, very close to the water, it is close to the issues, and really this university then really teaches about climate action and about ocean and seas, because that is what mainly maybe we connect first when we talk about the Baltic Sea. There's lots of more things, of course, as well. Well, then we really thought that we really should have research-based things on the ship. So that research should not be last, but research should be front and center at that university as well, which should, by the way, be also publicly open for people that might not attend a university, but should anyway allowed to hand out credits to the people that attended and that would like to transfer that credit to other universities. Well, and what is really, really important, and that is something that science is often lacking. really that results are openly and publicly carried out into the society and really do make an impact there. So then we had another key area, one other working group, and that is really something that young people are concerned about nowadays. Really, we thought that that is a big issue because there have been also some concerning facts lately from the OECD showing that the mental health is not always that great, especially if amongst school students. So really, we think that we should really take the youngsters into a safe place and that we should really reduce their stress and to have a better learning environment, but to have also a better society environment. So then another working group, you see like there was a lot of outcome, a lot of things where we as a Baltic Sea region can move forward and where we can really act soon. We really said there should be a deliberate career choice platform because I could sing right now here, but you don't want that because I would be horrible in that. And so choosing the right career path is not that good. Really, we want to allow the people to unfold, to reach their full potential, but also give the full potential to society because we need the best brains at the right spot. If we have the best brains at the wrong spot in topics where they're not interested, then those brains are basically lost. Well, then we have a lot of projects here in the Baltic Sea region, but we really should have one inter-regional online application, one platform really, where you can really get, with low threshold, engage, participate in the projects and where really you can inform yourself what is going on around you. Well, then we also had a group that said, we are here on this island, we are in the forest on this island, so let's talk about the forest. And we saw that there are huge problems if we look into the Baltic Sea region, sometimes not on that island so much as we could see, but there's a lot of problems. There should be things changed which are like that people should be educated about the forest. A lot of people don't know the trees, the tree kinds in a forest, not even some. Then there should be a ban on total clear cuts because that can harm the environment very bad, and the wood consumption should always be balanced. Those are just some of the main points you will find more in the Youth Declaration. Well, then another thing, we said really, we are here in this Baltic Sea region. We are like the oldest macro-regional strategy, if I'm right, 10 years now. And we have 7 of the 10 large marine dead zones in the world, in the Baltic Sea region. That is something that has to concern us all. We cannot look away from that. So really we say, please act upon that now. Really go forward. Don't have too much concern on acting against pollution. It is a big problem. Then we need to preserve and restore the health of the nature. That is really, and of the sea. Because the sea, we all gather here because we want to protect the sea. So let's also do that. Let's not forget about that, and let's start already today. Maybe if you see something, some plastic at the beach or so, that is only a very small beginning, but also take it to policy, take it home, and really change the world and the Baltic Sea region. Well, I'm almost finished. I'm going a little bit over my time, I think. I'm sorry for that. We really have, in the Baltic Sea region, a lot of capabilities. So why should we not use those capabilities to really say we want to be maybe the waste-free region of the world? Or at least produce the least amount of waste. We can try to do that. We have to make that ambitious goal, and we should implement it as soon as possible. But find more in the Youth Declaration. We also think that green choices should be always be available at the first choice. Reduce plastic in everyday life. We really have there a lot of things we already say, edible plates. Please just move away from plastic and really put it also into policy, take it to your countries, take action now on the plastic, because it's also a big issue in the Baltic Sea. Even though if you hear the biggest rivers, or some of the biggest rivers in Asia are putting the most amount of plastic in, and in the Baltic Sea region it's only very little, it's still way too much. Every piece of plastic is a piece of plastic too much, if I listen to the researchers. I'm sorry, I'm done in 1 second. So one last message that I want to share, and I will share to all of you, to the policymakers and everybody. This was a Baltic Sea youth camp, and the participants were very happy about it, if I can look when I talk to them. So let's take it to the next level. Let's make it also available in the next years, but we need some funding for that. And that is really something. This time we were lucky and got some funding from the project support facility from this CBSS. But we also need to have that in the future. We think that the inputs are great. You will have the Baltic Sea Youth Declaration. I'm going to show a QR code in 1 second. And then there's another thing is we really want one youth platform which should be established by the Council of Baltic Sea States. We even made a concert except for that, the youth, and we're going to upload that on our social media channels in about the next half an hour. So you can find really on the social media channels of the Baltic Sea Youth Camp. Scan this code and put your data in there, and we'll send you the Baltic Sea Youth Declaration as soon as it is ready. If you have any questions, come to me after the presentation. Sorry for going over the time. I hope it was not too bad.
That is really fine. You can stay.
Okay.
We're going to have the...
Okay.
Martin, thank you very much. That was energetic and it was informative, so that really counts. If you could just take one of the seats in there, that would be really nice, because we will now have the discussion panel. And I would like to welcome the General Director Council of the Council of the Baltic Sea States, Ms. Mayra Mora. Yeah, if you could just take a seat there. Thank you very much. We will also be joined by a representative of the Tartu City Council. Tartu is a city in Estonia, Marju Lauristin. You've already heard from the director of North Region. He will be one of the speakers as well, Mr. Kiel Nilsson. Thank you so very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you for the speeches. I'd like to let you know that we will start with a question to the audience, and they can reply to that. I guess this will kind of set the scene for us. So we have a question that you can reply to using your app, the app that we have been recommending yesterday, EU SBSR. Just get the app if you don't have it yet. Is the young generation a front runner for a circular society? Is the young generation, the generations Y and Z, I'd say. So far, we are a little bit swinging, but it makes sense because very few people have voted so far, and we will sometimes take a look at the numbers to really have a feeling of what it may be. I'd like to hear from Mrs. Lauristin. Hello to the debate. Thank you for being here. Do you think that the youth generation can bring a change? Or are you skeptical?
Yeah, in Estonia, we have, in this sense, very interesting situation. We have very active, say, youth participation in all these circular economy initiatives. And there have been brilliant ones, for example, like Clean the World. It was an Estonian initiative which now has spread over the globe. More than 158 countries participating last year.
And so you started...
15 million people. And that was Estonian initiative. But from other side, we see that...
I'm sorry, Estonia started the whole trend? Estonia was the first country to
Yes,
start
yeah,
the trend?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was, and the young people, students, for example, very active there. But from other side, we have in Estonia other problems which are not so beautiful because in waste recycling we are really lagging behind in whole EU. So it's a contrast, and it's in this sense interesting that if you look at the initiatives, then we have not only this mass initiative, also high-tech initiatives, very high level. But on everyday life, you see that there are a lot of unsolved problems.
Yeah, sometimes you would have these extra days, these fascinating actions when everybody wants to commit, but it's just one day a year, and then you have the regular. I wonder what the number is, what the percentage is of trash that is recycled in your country.
I think that this recycling issue really is very much depending on governance. And in Estonia, we see that municipalities really have, in this sense, like main responsibilities. The public procurement is done by municipalities. But from other side, there is a big monopolies, Ragnar cells, and very low level of competition. So that this kind of green component in public procurement is really very, very weak. And I suppose that's one of the problems.
Our audience could be interested in a short conversation that we had before the debate, and I remember you told me that it is a great thing to segregate your litter and to have the different containers for everything. But then reality kicks in, and so you have the different containers, but you live in an apartment complex, and you go to the storage place, and you see that there's just one bin for everything, and that's a disappointment.
Yeah.
I was just saying that you told me that it is a little bit sad that sometimes you want to segregate your trash, but then when you go to the bins of your neighborhood, there's just one container.
Yeah, that's quite a common situation. That's quite a common situation. But what I want to add that maybe in last years we see also very nice private initiatives. For example, there are now this network of secondary usage developed, so-called reuse centers. And they're private initiatives. It's not public initiative.
So sometimes that's better than public procurement. Tell me, Martin.
Yeah, one quick thing that I would like to mention. I'm myself living in Denmark, and if we would not sort the trash properly, the recycling company would not even take the trash. So that might be something that we can implement in the Baltic Sea region, which is very easy. So that building would get fined, or they would not just take the trash in that case.
And Germany is probably also like that.
I think so, but we have a big problem in most of the countries that people don't know in which bin to put what. So we also should have that maybe more standardized and really have like stickers on which bin does it go into. Because people, there's a knowledge problem also.
You would think that we have the colors and you know which one is which and they have the titles and yet sometimes it just seems that some people are maybe lazy.
Yeah, I suppose there is not the standard situations. There are very different situations. In different municipalities or different places, even in the city, in different houses. Though what you mentioned, that we need some common standards for EU, for example, more kind of common policies, so that also municipalities will be involved in this kind of common initiatives. And here we see that the most, if you look at generations, the most difficult is middle-aged generation, really. It's a middle-aged businessmen or even middle-aged bureaucrats who are quite conservative, and young people try to find something new. Old people, they have their old lifestyle, which really is very much caring about all things and trying to use them as completely as possible. And then in the middle, we have this new market economy people who entered market economy with the idea that now we are free to waste everything. And I suppose that's a problem.
So you're saying that the youth might be inclined to just consume as much as they wish, to buy very easily, and it also has to do with those things being easier to buy and cheaper than they were for the older generations back in the day?
Yeah, and I suppose now it's what is a new thing is this approach really generated by young people of sharing. Even if you look at the older people, for them, for example, usage of secondary, say, shops is something connected with the idea of poverty.
Yeah.
But with young people, it is changed now. Because for young people, it's a lot of the freedom of choice, a lot of fashionable things coming on, and even we have the very, very high-level design developed among art students and young artists, designers. And then they are, for example, very active even global level. So that, for example, one of our top designers have initiated the contact with Bangladesh, having there the cotton waste and using the cotton waste for really very high-level fashionable design.
So the youth actually care about it, and they are not afraid to do that. They are not ashamed. Buying something from a thrift shop would not really be a problem. They would not have to hide about it. They would not have to be shy about it. Do you also see that from the eco or socioeconomic perspective?
I was actually thinking that this is a very good question that you have up there, that if you want to change the lifestyles, then you have to start with the children. And I remember back in 1991, I was hired by the Swedish school minister as an expert to write a curriculum for environmental education from kids from nursery school up to high school, actually. And that we were then fired because there came a new government. But so we didn't complete the job, but that was an excellent idea, actually.
Yeah.
So if you want to change lifestyle, then you should start with the youngest. And I think definitely that you can change society by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I say, Mrs. Mora, that demographic change is a fact, you'll probably also agree.
Pardon?
Yeah, I just said that the demographic change is a fact, and we can be sure of that.
Yes, definitely. Somehow the conversation drifted from demographic issues to environmental issues.
It did, but it's all interconnected,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is connected, but I would like to speak rather, youth is a transient phenomenon. Old age or silver age is also transient. Let us be open about it, but it lingers longer. And I think that what was by Nordregio presentation presented earlier, it is the aging of population. So youth is a brief moment in our lives, and then the real life starts. Isn't
That
it
seems
right?
very realistic, a little bit pessimistic as well.
May I interrupt,
But
please?
what I wanted to say, it is, I rather see, and also in consumption patterns, in attitude towards environment, also the silver group also plays quite a role in our societies. And also in changing consumption patterns and lifestyles. And life in working life, the need to stay longer in employment, pressures on pension systems that all play a role in our societies, apart from environment.
So when it comes to the employment,
I'm sorry, it's echo.
I agree.
I need to.
To jest taka serdeczna prośba do realizatorów, jeśli moglibyśmy zrobić coś, żebyśmy lepiej słyszeli się tutaj, będąc na scenie. I just said that it would be nice if we
Now I hear you better.
kind of, yeah. I guess there is some echo, or maybe we just come closer to each other.
No, I think it's...
Okay. I'll do my best, and we'll do our best. You mentioned the employment situation, and I wonder if that transition to the silver economy is going to change much as well. So tell me, please, how the change in demographic situation is going to affect employment situation.
Definitely, as I said, it is one of the people need to stay longer in work because also one part is on the pressure on the pension system and also in the need for workforce. That entails also changes in training and education patterns. First of all, also matching the educational system to the demands of the labor market. But it is a fact that silver economy, European silver economy is a fact, and it is, I think, third, according to the assessment, in the world after US and China.
Mrs. Lauristin?
Yeah, I think that with this aging, it's connected a lot of different problems. Very important thing is really retraining. Because if now you look at the resources, and also education is a resource. But when you have people who have to stay on labor market for 50, 60 years, then you need to renew this resource. And the problem with retraining for people over 40 or over 45 really is the problem is growing and growing. And for example, if you have with the circular economy, the changes on sector. For example, we have now in Estonia, in mining sector, oil shale sector, where suddenly thousands of people are in situation of layout, and they have to be retrained because they have high level of salaries, they are qualified workers, and then they have to find a new place, but they are quite old in order to feel like students. So how to organize this retraining in a way that it will be effective and productive. And one solution is what we now are introducing is so-called preemptive retraining, so that if you already know this forecast by sectors,
that
where
your job may
then
disappear.
start to retrain beforehand to find alternative employment for people, for example, bookkeepers, drivers, even, and so on. So that's a very important problem with human resources, how to use this middle-aged and older resource effectively for a long time.
I agree. Mr. Rimmerlein?
Yeah, well, we see that the shortages that you work in one position are like the time frame that you work in one position are getting shorter and shorter. There have been lots of studies conducted about that. So I think, yeah, that is one thing, and we really need to face this retraining. But coming very much back to that, like why I think we should also like go and foster the youth is because you pretty much all people in this room have pretty much listened to themselves when they were the youth. They went into the studies that they choose, and you continued, and most of you are probably in the field that is somehow related to your studies nowadays. So I think we need to start there, but of course we need this additional training and see how we can enforce lifelong learning. But that is something that will also be discussed, I think, in the next sessions from the Nordic Council of Ministers.
Yeah. Mr. Nilsson, do you think that the elderly or people, let's say 60 plus, are willing to learn, to adapt, to readapt, to learn new jobs?
Yeah, I was over 60 when I started at the Regio. So actually you can...
that is nice.
Fine. I mean, as I said, the old age dependency ratio is a little outdated because you normally study until you are between 25 and 30. You don't, many people don't enter the labor market until then. So that is one thing. And then the other thing, I heard another day that there was 25% of Swedish 70-year-old people had some kind of employment or work. They were not completely retired, so to say. So you get a shift in this naturally, actually. And that is, of course, necessary in the long term. And we can also say that the costs for care of elderly people is primarily concentrated to the last 5 years of your lifetime, or something like that. So you also put that forward. So we have definitely something going on there that will transform the way how we look at working age, actually.
I agree. Mrs. Mora wanted to relate to that.
I wanted to relate in the sense that there is another factor, and that is and the fact of life, that is digitalization. That also has an impact on working patterns, because now the virtual work and physical office, the borderline is blurred, the borders are blurred. People tend more to have freelance work and flexible schedules, and that appeals both to youth and to elderly people, and that also contributes to a lot of to circular economy as well.
So you say digitalization and also freelance type of employment. Do you imagine a lot of this in the elderly group age?
And that relates also to the retraining that Mrs. Laurestin mentioned.
So,
and adaptation to new demands in the work market.
So there might be situations in the future when somebody asks at 12-year-old, what does your grandma do? And he would say she's a freelancer.
Well, you see, it's not a freelance. It's a new type of labor relations connected with quite clear structure, for example, so-called project-based work. And then there are gaps between those projects, so people are like jumping from one project to other project. So problem is here about the social security issues and these things, we have to decide about that. And then there are also the situation which is more and more widespread, that people are not working in one working place, but they have labor relations which are dispersed, and not only in one country, even between countries, so that there is a very big varieties in employment. And what is an issue here is that for young people, it's like very natural. But for middle-aged and older people, it's something new. It's quite a culture shock. So that when we speak about retraining for middle-aged and older people, it's not only giving knowledge, it's also the social retraining, the working habits, the capacity, for example, for this kind of networking and so on. So it's a social retraining which is needed also.
I wanted to make a note. I think there are quite a number of grandparents. You said your grandma with the computer. Ask how many grandparents are in this hall, please.
Yeah. So how many of you, dear audience, are retired but still?
Not retired, grandparents. Young grandparents.
Okay, but are just young grandparents. Okay. So how many working grandparents? Okay. Yeah, that's quite a number. It really gives me a feeling. And so how would this, how can we relate all of what we've said into circular economy? We know that the elderly will retrain more often, that they will work longer. How will this affect the circular economy? Will that help?
I suppose that's, in this sense, quite a universal situation. In circular economy, if you look at the so-called reskilling, I said it's not only some kind very narrowly professional. It's the social skills, and really for the older generation, this giving the new social skills is decisive. And also capacity to learn, to study, and opportunities, because normally schools are like for younger people. If you look at the older people, then say, oh, they have to prepare for retirement with something like handicraft or something simpler. But really also, I suppose for 55-year-old people, we need opportunity for example, second profession. Because if they stay in labor market until 70, then it's normal. Then at 50, they maybe have higher education, but now they want to change. So the universities have to change also, because now the students are becoming older already, but not so that it's normal that people 45, 50 are coming to university. I suppose it could be quite normal.
Yeah, that would be nice. Mr. Brimmerlein?
Yeah, I think we really need a state-owned system of the governments, like universities and like schools, which really is present, and that is something we are not ashamed of, but you're happy to go to. So where you go, where you really learn new skills, and it has to be state-owned, I think. We cannot leave that to companies, because some companies might say, oh, we skill the people. Some other companies will say, oh, I'm an attractive workplace. Anyway, I won't skill the people, but I will get them anyway. And that cannot be it. So we really need to establish a government-owned thing. And I think this reskilling is a whole different question when we look at how IT technology, AI, is emerging. Then I think we're going to have it throughout all ages that we have to have this reskilling. Also, when you are 5 years out of university, you really need that in maybe 20 years. So because with artificial intelligence and other technologies, blockchain technology emerging, we really have to really jump on the train and really see that we are also still going along. And I think we really need a system which is out of school, out of university, but by the government owned.
Thank you. Mr. Nilsson?
Yeah, I was thinking that when it comes to circular economy and its effects on labor market, there are actually two things. One is that you start using smarter technologies, and their digitalization plays, of course, an enormously important role. So that is part of the solution. But what I tried to say in my presentation was that there is also a part in the circular economy that can be solved with manual jobs, which does not mean that you need 5 years of university education to solve. And I think that would be good for the society, and especially for integration of immigrants, actually, that we would have much more of these kind of jobs. And their circular economy is a part of that solution, actually.
So that's really optimistic, because it also tells you that it doesn't always have to take 3 or 5 years of retraining. It just can be simple jobs, but very important jobs.
Yep. Yeah, and it has shown that if you go to a job early, when you come to a new country, and combine that with education and training, then you get more integrated much faster than if you have to wait until you get all the skills that are needed for more advanced jobs before you enter the labor market. Then you have come into a situation where you get used to rely on the society for your living, actually.
Yeah, well, excuse me, but there is some danger of discrimination, really, in that. And I will say that from Estonian perspective, we are looking more on this kind of solutions for also this waste sorting and waste solution, which are more connected with the biotechnology, with robotics and so on. So not to have this hope that we will have influx of people who are, say, agreeing to have a bit more simple and dirty work. I suppose that it could be only temporary. It's not a solution.
Yeah, and that's actually what I believe Mr. Nilsson mentioned. He said that maybe at the beginning of your stay abroad, you would have this less demanding job, but at the same time you will be in the process of education with the forecast of some more advanced jobs in the future.
And circular economy is not possible really without these high-tech solutions. It's not possible only relying on this manual work.
No, I agree. Mrs. Mora, I've seen that you would like to add something.
No, I wanted to add one thing, that it is the policies and new incentives on the part of the governments or new legislation limiting use of this and that, but I think at the basis is the fact that also has created very many problems in ecology, in environment, is the consumption patterns of us. And there, I think it is very difficult to change by orders from above. It needs to be the public awareness campaigns that I see, for example, in Sweden. Mend your shoes, mend your clothes, don't buy every season something new, all these cheap things that you throw out after each season. I think that is a huge polluter and huge
I agree, but it also kind of reminds me of the discussions that we have had yesterday, also about the need to change mentality and also to spread awareness.
Yeah, I suppose that we can change mentality not by lecturing, not by preaching. And I mentioned this Estonian initiative of Clean the World. It started really as local initiative, Estonia. Clean, in one day, people come out, starting from kids, from children, and ending with grandfathers and grandmothers. And really, there was a big cleaning day. But what it now have been 10 years already. And what is important, when people see how children, kids, are really discovering in forest or in a pond somewhere, in nice nature, the very ugly waste where old people, older, grown-up people have been left, and then kids are collecting that. And the kids then are looking at them from TV and saying that, hi, what are you doing? You see what is here. And I suppose for changing mentality, it's very important, this kind of, say, social recognition or social attitude which is created by this generation communication also. That kids are very important here.
I agree, and if you have initiatives like the youth camp, you also have the pressure, the natural pressure coming from the youth, and this can also influence the previous generations. We are open to your questions, and in case you would like to ask anything, just let us know. Oh yeah, there's a question from the room, and actually the mic, yeah, is yours.
Yes, hello. My name is Frederick Campbell. I come from Sweden, from Kristianstad. And I would like first to address a question to Mr. Nilsson. You mentioned about the immigrants in Sweden. The immigrants now are mainly living in the three large towns, and there's a quite high unemployment. And while it's very, very good to integrate immigrants into the workforce, I can say that I came to Sweden at the age of 24, 57 years ago, and I had a university degree. And the first thing I learned very, very quickly that language was absolutely necessary. And it's very good to see in Sweden that they have what they call a SFE, which is Swedish for immigrants. And it's no use just coming to a country and say, okay, well, now I want to work. Even if you have skills, or maybe if you don't have skills, or if you don't have basic education, I, as an employer, first would almost expect, if not demand, that I employ you because you can understand what I'm talking about in my own language. The other thing we find also in Sweden that the immigrants are very well suited to elderly care. They make very, very good workers in the elderly care. And my second point was we're talking about elderly, and often one thinks that the elderly people, they are a waste of space. But just like we heard yesterday, that waste is a resource, elderly are also a resource. We, the Silvers, we have a very, very good situation to be mentors, to be supporters, and to inform people, in particular the younger people. So we aren't just, because we've reached the age of 70, we shouldn't be thrown down onto the scrap heap. There's a lot of us, even over 70, that are very active and very interested to participate, and we can all help. So don't regard us as a waste, regard us as a resource.
Nobody does. Mr. Nielsen?
The question about the language, I didn't have time and I didn't go into details in this study about integrating immigrants into the labor markets. But of course, language skills are an important part of the skills of people. And you are right, that is one of the conclusions, that it's a very important prerequisite. But there are also jobs that you can start with without being perfect in the language. And then you can, there are some studies that have shown that you learn the language faster, actually, in a combination with having some work, actually, together with so you have language training and some kind of work at the same time.
But I would agree that when people don't speak the language of the country they live in, they tend to stick to their own communities and not really integrate into the society. So the Swedish program that the gentleman mentioned is a crucial one. And I believe
And there is also another conclusion is that taking kids to the daycare also helps them. They get better results later on when they come to school, which makes them more, so to say, attractive to the labor market later on. So that is also part of it.
Mrs. Lauristin?
Yeah, I would like to bring in one other aspect also. The circular economy and how it's connected with really social inequality. Because, yes, one inequality issue is age. But also, if you look at the real life, then you see that from one side, so-called green lifestyle is really emerging among the most maybe well-off part of the population. It's part of so-called fashionable lifestyle. It's a new consumerism, green consumerism. But from other side, it's connected with a voluntary work to help people. And here I have to say, for example, that when we speak about food waste, then there is a very important thing emerged now. In Estonia, it really came from Holland. We had one really very active young man who came to Estonia and started the movement, which now is a national movement of food banks. We have the national network of food banks. Involved there are the producers of food, the big stores, restaurants, and so on, but hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. And they are really collecting this food, distributing it together with a social protection of people from municipalities every week in thousands of families. And though really at first helping to preserve food, but from other side really very much helping old people who are in poverty, and also helping families with children who are in poverty. So I suppose we have to see the circular economy also as a part of the social development.
Any one of us that would engage in a movement comparable to the food bank in Estonia doing something would already really start changing the world. We have another question from the audience, if I am not mistaken. Okay, and so it's great to have you.
Hello. The conversation was, in my opinion, a bit dominated about waste and separating waste, putting it into different colored dustbins, and how to collect. Do you know that there is a kind of 250 different pieces of plastic which is used as a packaging in the affair? I'm university graduated, but I really do not know how to separate all these kinds of plastics, and I do not want it. What we need to do is to challenge scientists, chemists, etc., to design plastics that are really biodegradable, or not even use even design plastics at all. So please, if you talk about circular economy, don't go into waste collection or separation.
I have to say that yes, this kind of initiatives to create the new materials which are dissolvable, they are already going on. And I have to say that, you know, we have this year 150-year anniversary of our Songfest. 300,000 people will gather. And now there is a solution and really decision that no plastic which is of one-time usage, no this normal plastic, but new material which is all solvable. And it will be prepared from this, what is, you know, growing on in the sea, the
seaweed.
No, yeah, and so that you can not reuse but dissolve, or other way, the new things which are reusable 3, 4, 5 times. So new materials are emerging, and yes, I suppose that's the solution.
I know, I see it, but the dominance of the vested interests in the plastic industry are so big that they even dominate the conversation here.
That's an interesting view. Tell me, please.
Yes, and I'm there completely with you. And I think that was also what a lot of youth said. How do you want us to have a sustainable lifestyle? How, like, if we cannot afford these things? So politicians can do 3 things. Politicians can either talk, persuade people, or say and say do that or that. Then they can write policy, which forbids something. And then they can spend money or put taxes on that. And we can support scientists with spending money. We can support also really that movement towards those biodegradable plastics, completely biodegradable plastics, by saying we tax them differently and tax other plastics in a different way. We can give it a price and really help really the industry move behind the scientists and really support them at all means, because now plastic is just too cheap. Because like when you research something and you know your product will be a little bit more expensive than the plastic alternative, and the mass of the people, you can't scale it because the mass of the people will go to, and continue go to plastic, then you might not even do the research.
And that's quite a challenge, because if you're a businessman, you will kind of make sure that your costs are not too high, and then you kind of turn to plastic, which is, again, a shame.
Yes, and you do that as a private consumer as well. You go sometimes for the cheaper product. Like if I, for example, if I would fly, if I would want to go here, then often air travel is the cheapest. Now that this has nothing to do with plastic, but the train, some people might want to use the train, but it's more expensive. So how can that be? And we have the same situation with plastic. You might then take the plane instead of the train, and the same happens with plastic, with really biodegradable fabrics, with everything. Like really, this circular economy, we have to support it.
So, however counterintuitive this may be, we should try to turn into the alternatives that are maybe a little bit less comfortable, but then much better for the environment.
I suppose that people not all people, but very big part of people already, they are understanding what the plastic is doing to the environment. I suppose what we have seen, all these pictures about the fish and so on, in Estonia at least, it have had enormous impact. And for example, the call to try to do with less or without the plastic, it have really been met with a very, very great understanding. So my city, the Tartu city, tries to become the city without plastic as soon as possible. In our department stores, in stores and everywhere, we have this movement not to use this kind of this plastic which could pollute everything around us.
Mrs. Mora, I'd like to hear a very brief final statement.
Instead of final statement, I'll give a brief ad. This CBSS, our organization, is doing, putting much effort in to foster cooperation in the field of demographic research. And we have the project Aging Workforce, Social Cohesion and Sustainable Development, Political Changes within the Baltic Sea region, and also accompanying policy recommendations. This is a research on different challenges facing our member states. But in fact, it is, we do not lack assessment of challenges and even recommendations. What we need in our region is effective implementation and finding new ways. Thank you.
We have the ideas, we just need to implement them. And there's so much that we can do, but we can always start with ourselves and try not to focus too much on the plastic, just try to focus on how to avoid using it in our everyday life. And also, the younger generation that is now entering the workforce is not just this digitalized one, ready to face a lot of challenges and reskill every once in a while. But it also is the one who is interested in the environment and might actually, according to the survey, be the one putting the change forward. But what is also great is that we will have more and more silver economy, and the people are also willing to learn. We just need to take off the social stigma. We need to make it easy. We need to make it institutionalized so that it's available. And we also need to make sure that the immigrants have very fast access, not just to simple jobs, but also to some good education that will then prove beneficiary and will have the opportunity to bring equal chances for everyone. That seems a little bit of a conclusion, but there never is the perfect one. Before I thank you, I'd like to say to our audience that we really appreciate your presence here, and also the fact that you've participated in the questions and in voting. We actually have a survey for you in which we ask you about the forum, about the conference. It is now available on your app. Please just make sure to evaluate our event. It is not the end of the event, but it would be really nice if you just take your time during a forthcoming break, because we would like to hear from you what you think of the event, how it was organized, and what your general feelings are. I hope you've enjoyed this debate and you find it as informative as I do. I really had a pleasure to be here with you, and I feel like we just owe a big round of applause for our discussionists or panelists, Mrs. Mora, Mrs. Lauristin, Mr. Nilsson, and Mr. Rimmelein. You were great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.